great, though, to have Jewel with us today, Fran's mom. And, of course, they were given some bad news by the doctor. They told her that she had lung cancer. But this is what I know about our times. Our times are in the hands of the Lord. When it's our time to go, you don't have to have cancer. You can just fall over dead. That's just the truth. You can fall asleep and never wake back up. You can be young. And then on the other hand, you can have cancer, and the doctors can say whatever they want, and God can override it.
That's right.
It's appointed unto man once to die. That's something we all have to face. That's not the important part. After that is the judgment. That is the important part. We have to be ready to go no matter when. That's why the old rugged cross makes all the difference, right? Amen. Now, this morning, I'm going to preach a message entitled, The Riddle of Samson. The Riddle of Samson. So we're going to be in Judges. If I wanted to really twist you in a knot, I'd say we're in the book of Samson this morning and see how long it took you to find it. We're in the book of Judges this morning, though. Chapter 13 and 14 is where you find, even chapter 15 is where you find the portion of the story that we're going to be dealing with today. And I entitled this message, The Riddle of Samson. Of course, Samson did give riddles, but the truth is his life was a riddle as well. And so we're going to explore how this intertwines this morning. And I'm coming down so I can look you in the eyeballs. My text is going to be just one verse. I'm going to read a lot of scriptures, but I'm going to go and give you the text, and then we're going to backtrack. The text this morning is going to be Judges chapter 14, verse 14, and it happens to be a riddle that Samson gave, and it simply says, and he said unto them, out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. That's the riddle that he is primarily known for having given. And how many of you are super acquainted with the story of Samson? He's just one of the judges. Some of you may not have your hands up. This story may be new to you. Samson was a child of promise. His mother was barren. She could not have children. If you go back to chapter 13, you find a little snippet of the story that we'll read, verse 2 through 5. There was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of Danites, whose name was Manoah. That would be Samson's father. And his wife was barren and bare not. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman, and said unto her, behold, now thou art barren, and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive, and bear a son. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine, nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. He's calling her to a life of separation. For lo, thou shalt conceive, and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Can you imagine being Samson's mother? Can you imagine an angel coming and visiting you and giving you the most wonderful news that you could ever imagine? First of all, she's probably scared half out of her mind. Second, she probably thought to herself, well, why didn't you go tell my husband? Which is just a little bit interesting, because usually we think of the patriarchal system. You would think that the angel would go to the husband. But no, women were very important in the scriptures. And the angel goes to her, just like the angel went to Mary and then went to Joseph. And so she tells her husband about this, and she's all excited about it, and they cry out to the Lord and pretty much say, you gotta give us more directions and more insight into this. And the angel comes to her again. And the second time when the angel comes to her, she takes the angel to her husband. And they have this conversation about this unique child that is to be born. Now the Bible describes John the Baptist in an interesting way, because he was filled with the Holy Spirit in his mother's womb. And the child leapt inside of her. Something unique happened with him before he was even born. Well, something unique was happening with Samson before he was even born, because God was calling Samson to be a Nazirite, and God called his mother to partake of the vows for herself, so that that child, even though it has not been born yet, still doesn't have the influences of the things that God was saying he was supposed to abstain from. A Nazirite before being born. That's just so incredible, so unusual. It's the only instance of something like this in the scriptures. So imagine that something that incredible happens to you. What is your expectations for this child?
Great.
Great. Isn't that your expectations? Absolutely. I have to think she was sitting there dreaming about what the future was going to look like. Because the primary thing that God said was going to happen with this son is he was going to begin to throw off the oppression that was over them. They were living in bondage, and he was going to begin throwing off the oppression. So, in my mind, I can just see her dreaming about a day when Israel is free, when the Philistines are not a concern, when God is moving through her son, and she gets to be the proud mama. You know that's what mamas want to be, or grandmamas. They want to be proud, make her proud. Okay? Because the last thing you want is to have your children break your heart. Unfortunately, though, a lot of children do break their parents' heart, don't they? A lot of children break their parents' hearts. So, that's just the beginning of Samson. That's a little intro into how it should all begin. But Samson, he was a bad boy. He wasn't the good boy. He was the bad boy. And I don't know how this happens, but it happened. I'm certain, the Bible doesn't tell us, but I am 100% certain his parents raised him to love the Lord. I am certain his parents would have done everything they could to have been a godly influence. You don't get a visit by an angel and then go try to have your child be a wretched child. Do you know what I'm saying? And so they would have invested everything they could have into this boy so that he would have grown up to be the godly person that God wanted him to be, so that God could do with him what God wanted, right? That's the way it works. But I said he's the bad boy. Judges chapter 14, verse 1 through 3. And Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now the Philistines was the enemy. Now, they are the enemy, by the way, but they've been a benevolent enemy. Have you ever had a benevolent enemy? No. Let me introduce you to our government. They're nice to you, and then they take your money away from you, okay? They are a benevolent enemy, because even though they have subjugated the people, and they are in control, and the Israelites don't have any political say at all, they actually have tried to integrate The town Timnah was not very far from where his town was. It was well within the borders of what Israel should have been. And from the picture that we get, when he goes to Timnah, the Philistines are just happy to accept him. I mean, they would be content to completely intermarry with the Israelites, and then that just makes them all theirs, and then everything works out from there, which is benevolent, but it goes completely against the things of God. He goes down to Timnah and sees these nice enemies, and one of them's more than nice. She is hot. She is a sight to behold. And after he saw her, his little heart went pitter patter, flip flop. Okay? Now, you may not know this, but Samson's name means sun, S-U-N, sun. But he's not very bright. Okay, they named him wrong. It should have been Dum-Dum. He goes down, he sees this little girl, and his heart goes flippy-floppy, and he goes back in verse number 3. He came up and told his father and mother and said, I have seen a woman. I mean, she's everything a woman should be. She's not a little girl, she's a woman. I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, therefore, you get her for me to wife. Oh, he got everything he wanted and he's spoiled? Well, he probably is spoiled. He's the only child. He's the child of promise. They've done everything they could to make his life perfect. He probably is spoiled, Doris. That's good insight there. But he knows what he wants, and he knows when he wants it, and when he wants it now. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. Now, what he just did is he demanded for his parents to arrange this marriage. Do you realize that that totally was in defiance of their culture? In their culture, the parents picked the wife, not you. If you would have picked your wife, then you would have had to have done it with their blessing somehow or another. But typically, that wasn't how it was done. They picked for you. And you know who they don't want to pick? A Philistine. Because they know that they might seem benevolent, they might seem nicey-nicey and cutesy-cutesy, but they're the ones that are causing all the problems and have put their people in bondage. You don't make nicey-nicey with the enemy. You got to keep the line clear on what is what. But, sorry Blake, your brain is still developing. I keep hearing this in the news, that until a person's like 24, the brain's developing. Don't trust anything he does. Okay? They were talking about these kids that have committed horrific crimes and how it's against the law for them to have a life sentence because their brains are still developing. And because scientifically they know their brains are still developing, they think that there's a chance that after the brain gets developed right, they might think straight because they're thinking your brain's messed up. Hasn't developed all the way and you did this horrific thing. And I've been reading stuff about this in the news. Well, Samson, he's young. His brain's probably not developed all the way, but he does know right from wrong. His parents may have spoiled him, but they taught him right. And what he was doing right here was being disrespectful to his parents. The truth is, by itself, he should be stoned already. He was not honoring his father and his mother. He was dishonoring them, and they made the case for him. She is an uncircumcised Philistine. Now, of course, she's a woman, so we have to understand what they're saying. Circumcision set the Israelites apart as God's people. The people that were uncircumcised were those that were ungodly. What they're saying is she doesn't serve God. She worships idols. This is another problem for you, Samson, because God's word was very plain, not only in the New Testament, where you're not to be unequally yoked with an unbeliever, but there's about 4 or 5 places in the Old Testament that told the Israelites the exact same thing. They were not to take them as a wife. But Samson doesn't care. Ooh. Samson, you don't understand the value of spiritual things. An angel visited your parents. God himself put stipulations around your life that wasn't for everybody else. It was just for you because he was calling you out to be special. And you are squandering your spirituality like it does not matter to you. A lot of young people do this kind of thing. It's a shame, but it's true. Well, I'm going to take us further in the story. Verse 5 and 6. Then Samson went down, and his father and his mother, to Timnah, and came to the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him, or he tore him, as he would have rent a kid, and he had nothing in his hand. But he told not his father or mother what he had done. So somehow or another, they were going on this way to Timnah to see this girl, and then him and his parents, for whatever reason, aren't together at this point. I don't know if his parents stopped to visit somebody, but he's by himself. Now, when he's by himself, he goes to the vineyard. Now, one of the stipulations for him was that was not the place that he should have been, because he's a Nazirite. He's supposed to leave this alone, but that's exactly where he makes himself. We find out that he breaks this promise to God. And not only is there grapes that he's going to eat, but he's going to go down to have a party, and it's going to be a alcohol-laden party. And I'm sure he's giving up parts of his vow that God put on him. And as he goes down, this lion comes out against him. Now, it's not a full-grown lion. It's a young lion. I don't want a young lion attacking me. I don't want my cat attacking me. You know what I'm saying? There's a reason my cat doesn't have claws on her front. When we wanted one, my wife said it can't have claws on its front, so we bought one that didn't have claws on its front. I said, "Buy, we got it for free." That's the way to get stuff in my house. Okay, doesn't have any claws on the front, so when it tries to scratch you, it really can't do it, but it has claws on the back. If you pick it up, it can still get you with its back claws. How many of you have really been scratched up by a cat before? Imagine a lion. Even a young lion is not something you want to tangle with. But you see, Samson's in the wrong place. He's where he doesn't belong. And all of a sudden, this thing comes against him. But when it does, God is gracious. God is so gracious that the Holy Spirit moves upon him. And he tears that animal like it was nothing. Like it was a passive animal. Now, I don't know exactly, it's kind of a gruesome thing to consider, but the way the description's here, I always kind of thought of him having his hand in the mouth of the lion, but when I read commentators, they say it's more like he took the legs of that thing and just ripped the animal in half somehow or another. That's you didn't do that on your own, by the way, Samson. If you're too dumb to figure it out, I can't help you now. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't tell his parents anything about this. So we already see here that Samson is strong, that he can be a destroyer, which is a good thing. Do you remember how David, when he was young, he slayed a lion and a bear? And later that gave him courage when he had to face a Philistine. Well, here is Samson's moment where he has to face a lion. And the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. God is trying to tell him something. I have called you to a work, and if you will follow after me, just like I did this here, this is a little taste of what it could be later for you. Samson's going to squander his life away, though. Verse 15 to 18. We're going to see how Samson's destroyed before he gets destroyed. Just like we saw what this lion could have said to him about his conquests, we're going to see what happens now with this wife. And it's going to tell us everything about his future. It came to pass on the 7th day that they said unto Samson's wife, Entice thy husband that he may declare unto us the riddle. Now, Samson, that's the riddle I read at the beginning. Samson's there, and there's 30 young fellas there, and he makes an agreement with them. I'll tell you a riddle, and if you can tell me what it means, I will buy each one of you a pair of underwear and a Sunday suit. Now, that may seem strange, but that's really what it would have been in modern language. They had the undergarment, and then they had the fancy garments. Okay, but what it was this was an expensive outfit. This would be the kind of thing you would wear to the wedding. And so they figure, oh, there's 30 of us and there's only one of you. We can figure this out. What's your riddle? And now that he's given them the riddle, they have no clue what it is. And they get worried because they don't want to give up their stuff. Especially to some horrible, rinky, stinky Israelite that's underneath of them. So they threaten his wife. Lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have you called us to take what we have? Is it not so? You're part of this, aren't you? Samson's wife wept before him. Oh, Samson! And said, Thou dost but hate me, and lovest me not. If you really loved me. Hey, I'm sorry, ladies. But if you want to turn it on, you have more ability than me, because you're an emotional creature more than me. And so I've discovered that some women can just throw tears out there. And sometimes I think, is this manipulation? Because if so, I don't want none of that business. You know what I'm saying? That's what she's doing. She's putting it on. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of my people, and hast not told it me. But he said unto her, Behold, I have not told it my father nor my mother, and shall I tell it thee? I mean, you're not even my wife yet. She wept before him the 7 days, or until the 7th day, while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day, he told her, because she lay sore upon him. In other words, boy, she was making his life miserable. Now, he's supposed to marry her on the 7th day. It's supposed to be the day of wedding bliss. But all he's getting is wedding grief. And he's thinking to himself, I can make this nicey-nicey, or this is going to be a rough, rocky start. So he tells it, and she tells the riddle to her people. Verse 18, And the men of the city said unto him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? He said unto them, If you had not plowed with my heifer, you had not found out my riddle. So then he's really saying is, if you hadn't been messing with my woman, he called her a heifer, sorry. And when he did that, it's this little poem. One of the Bible scholars that tries to translate it over, he tried to keep it in a poem kind of a way, and he put it this way. If you had not plowed with this heifer of mine, you would have not found out this riddle of mine. Or I would have said, if you had not plowed with this heifer of mine, you would have not found out the riddle in time. I would have liked that a little bit better, but I wasn't there to inform him. Okay? And so, Samson has showed us he has weaknesses. Now, he's strong. He has weaknesses. One of his weaknesses is himself, because he lacks a good, strong commitment to the Lord. And the second weakness is women. Because if a woman just bats her eyelashes and throws out some tears and gets persistent, he's going to cave in. Is that the kind of husband you want? A cave-in husband? What kind of woman wants a cave-in husband? Although as soon as you get one that's not a cave-in husband, you don't like that either. Okay, I mean, let's just be honest. It's hard to know what we want, right? I'm sorry, but it's just truth. There's a lot of truth to that, okay? The riddle of Samson. Now I'm going to pause. And the riddle of Samson, not Samson's riddle, the riddle of Samson. Samson is supposed to grow up and be a judge of Israel. He is supposed to be God's man, and his parents are devastated. Now, I didn't read one of the verses. I left it out. So I have to pick it up and put it back in. Are you ready for this? Because this takes people's theology and it just messes it all up. Verse 3 and 4. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. Now let me read the verse I skipped. But his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he sought occasion against the Philistines. For at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. You don't like that, do you, Doris? She's actually got wrinkles across her forehead that says, What? I had somebody call me, somebody in the ministry, and they were devastated because a family member of theirs wasn't going the direction they were hoping for. And that's hurtful as a parent. You feel like you failed. And if you're a pastor, it's even worse. You feel like everybody's going to judge you because of what somebody else does as a decision. And as this person was talking to me on the phone, I was thinking to myself, God could be moving here. Your heart can be breaking, and God can be moving. That is the interesting thing to me that causes this to be a riddle, the riddle of Samson. Samson is actually wrong before God in what he's doing, but God has a hand in it anyhow. I'm not saying that God was approving of Samson's behavior. He already said he disapproved of his behavior. But Samson had already started to harden his heart. He was already rebellious. He was already against his parents. And you know what I believe? I believe if Samson would have followed strong after the Lord, he would have seen victories over the enemy, and he wouldn't have faced the kind of death that he faced. But God is in charge, not you. Even if you rebel, God is still in charge. And so God is going to get his way out of Samson. Either way, there's the easy way and there's the hard way. And God, in his infinite wisdom, knew that if Samson wasn't going to go the spiritual route to accomplish God's purpose, God had another course that's going to accomplish the same thing. So God saw the future, and he saw what was going to happen, and he saw that Samson was nicey-nicey with the Philistines. Something had to happen to change that. This instance here is what changes Samson's heart against the Philistines. God is moving even when we cannot see it, even when we cannot understand it. Warren Wiersbe was looking at this passage and he said, because of this event, this woman that he wants to go down to, and because of this riddle that he gives them, he's going to kill 30 men in verse 19. That's to get the garments. Then he's going to burn up the crops of the Philistine enemies. And that's going to be a big blow to them. Then he's going to slaughter a great number of Philistines in verse 7 and 8 of chapter 14. And then he's going to end up slaying 1,000 Philistines in verse number 15. All because Samson went this direction. Now his parents could not see. They could not understand. But this is what I want you to know. Even though there are failures and weaknesses of people, it cannot undermine the plan of God. And you can rest in some level of confidence in that. If I could go back and talk to Samson's parents, I'm sure their hearts were devastated. And if I could say something to them, I would say to them, God is moving when you cannot see it. When everything is wrong in the situation around you, God is still right. And even though you may not be pleased, and even though there may be pain, and even though there may be sorrow, let there be confidence in God. He is not failing. People fail. God never fails. His promise is going to be true no matter what. The riddle of Samson. Do you have children that have wandered away from the Lord? Does it break your heart? It should. Can you still have confidence in God? Oh, yes. If God's given promises to you, you stand on the promises of God, even though everything seems wrong, even though your heart is broken. Don't let your confidence shake in what he is doing, because the path to this place called Timnah with this woman is going to ultimately bring Samson around to his senses at the end. It's not a beautiful end, but it's an honorable end and a godly end. Samson's riddle and the riddle of Samson. Out of the eater, I told you this was my text. And I gotta hurry up. Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. Now that was Samson's riddle, because after he killed that lion, it's very dry there. It would have probably dehydrated, but animals may have foraged it and scavenged out part of it, but it wouldn't have rotted. It wouldn't just been a pussy, rotty mess, okay? Instead, the bees found it, and the honeybees built a nest inside of it. And Samson's going back to the vineyard where he doesn't belong, and he sees this. Then he probably gets a stick or something, and he dabs it down in there. He's a brave fella. And he gets himself some of the honey out. Now, I said he takes a stick. That's my thinking. But the way the Bible describes it in the Hebrew is that he would have taken his hand and got some out. He got enough not just for him, but he ends up giving some to his parents, but he doesn't tell them where it comes from. Now you got to understand something. He was a Nazirite. He was not supposed to touch a dead animal. He's already broken his vow when it comes to alcohol. Now he's broken his vow about touching the unclean thing. The only thing he has left that is his connection between him and God and his Nazirite vow is his hair. That is the last thing. Do you see where he's going? Do you see why the hair was the issue? Because it wasn't just the hair. It was everything about his life that was spiritual. He was casting it aside one at a time. He gets the honey out of it. He feeds it to his parents. And that's where he gets this riddle from. So, out of the eater, the lion, came forth meat. And of course, that's something to eat. Out of the strong, that's the lion, came forth sweetness, and that's the honey. Okay, so that was his riddle. They got it by hook and by crook. But in this riddle that Samson had, I think there's a deeper truth. See, God was moving and working even in ways Samson couldn't understand in his life, because he was God's man, whether he wanted to be God's man or not. When he gave this riddle, I believe there is a deeper truth in this riddle. Out of the eater came forth meat. What was the eater? It was this horrible thing that would have crushed him, that would have destroyed him, that should frighten him. It is the difficult, frightening, overwhelming things in life that God can use to help us. Out of the eater came forth meat. Out of the strong isn't a positive word here. That's the terrifying word. Came forth something sweet. I believe that when there is things that are horrible, that are swirling around a person, Out of it, God can bring forth something precious. Samson's whole life was the lion. He was the one that was out of control. He was the one that was the danger. And yet at the end, God brought sweetness out of his life and accomplished his purposes. Ehud Avriel took 3 months looking for a ship to transport some of his purchases to Palestine. This was around the year 1947. At last he was able to hire the Nora. It was a tramp steamer in the Yugoslavian port of Brno. To all eyes, his shipment consisted of Italian onions, 600 tons of them. British customs agents would not likely sniff around that cargo for very long. That was the idea. The 600 tons of Italian onions covered the real cargo. It was a shipment of Czech rifles that he had purchased for the Haganah, which was Israel's army. Anybody else that would have saw that would have only seen the stench. They would have seen the offensiveness of it. But hidden underneath was what was going to help Israel win the battle for their nation. That's how God can move in our lives. Just because something stinks in your life doesn't mean that God doesn't have something underneath of it. It doesn't mean that he's not moving, that he's not working. God is always moving. God is always working, but we don't always see. Out of the eater came forth meat. Out of the strong came forth sweetness. What's the point of my message? You can trust God when things don't make sense. Doris, when your mom was suffering, it didn't make sense. You couldn't see how God was moving. Do you know you can trust that he was? If our church is struggling with finances, if things seem difficult, God is still moving. We can have our confidence in him. Just because there's things in upheaval doesn't mean that God turned around and walked away. No. When things are messed up in a person's family and there's discord, whether it's between children or between a husband and a wife, it doesn't mean that God's forsaken you. Now, if there's sin, we need to deal with the sin so that we can go on the path that would be the easy path with God. Okay? And I don't mean that everything that you do for God turns out easy. But the path of the one who is wicked is very hard, and it leads to the worst of places. Samson's going to learn that lesson the hard way. He's going to have his eyes gouged out. He's going to be toiling as a mockery. And there he is going to be. And that is what it's going to take for him to turn his heart finally to the Lord. Let's turn our heart to the Lord way before then. Let's decide that God is worthy of our lives no matter what happens. Because too many people will take circumstances and they'll shake their fist at God and they don't realize God really has their best intention. He has the best intention for them. No matter what, he would hold us in the palm of his hand. Amen? Bow your heads for a moment.